Thank you very much for that warm welcome. I'd like to begin by quoting Einstein, and I think this is one of my favorite Einstein quotes. So Einstein said, there are two things that are infinite in the universe itself and human stupidity. And he wasn't sure about the universe. So he was a genius with a sense of humor. What can I say? He must have been a hit at parties, I guess, as evident from that picture, I suppose. Anyway, speaking of the universe, when I read the theme for this TEDx conference, I was a little stupefied. You know, infinity and beyond. Two words rang out in my head as I pondered upon this very quote. We can't truly wrap our heads around the concept of infinity. However, we still try and put it into a context that we can ever so slightly comprehend. Now, before I begin my talk, I'd just like to issue a disclaimer. Some of you may be anticipating a talk about the boundless expanse of the universe, or the mathematical definition of infinity, perhaps, or maybe even the infinitely repeating irrational numbers. And while these are all perplexing and breathtaking ideas, it's not what I will be talking about today. Today, I decided to talk about something close to the ground and my own heart. A very good evening to one and all present here. My name is Zohair Gandhi. Now, I want everyone to relax. Let yourselves settle into this environment. I say this because there's a few questions that I'd like to ask you, and I hope that everyone answers them with pure honesty. You can do so with a show of hands. Okay? So, how many of us have bought new clothes despite having clothes that we've barely worn before? And how many of us have bought a new phone or a piece of technology, not because the one we had was malfunctioning, but because the release of the new model made ours seem outdated? I've done this. And how many of us are guilty of buying something because it was trending and not because we genuinely needed it? Thank you. You must be wondering where I'm going with this. Well, allow me to shed light on some other things. The mass production of luxury goods has been rising over the past decade. The media has become increasingly saturated with products, with advertisements and promotions for branded products and services. Additionally, the levels of personal debt have also been rising. What does this all point to? It's pointing to an increased amount of consumer spending. Don't believe me? Here's a line graph depicting consumer spending in India in INR billions over the past 10 years. In spite of a few drops here and there, you can see that the general trend is that the spending is rising. And there's bad news. It's predicted to keep rising. What do you call this excessive buying then? The answer? Consumerism. Now, consumerism is also an economic concept, but in the context that I'll be discussing it, it refers mainly to the preoccupation of society with the acquisition of consumer goods. As of now, the majority of the world is engrossed in material assets. The media propagates the doctrine that an individual's success can be measured by the materialistic wealth that they have accumulated over the years. And unfortunately, people are buying it. No pun intended. Fine, a little bit of a pun intended. So now people start working harder, putting in more hours at work to add some more zeros to the check that they receive every month. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, months turn into years, as people chase a finish line that escapes them just as they're about to cross it. Just when contentment begins to settle in, another material object catches the eye, and the game is back on. Why does this happen? Because society believes that you're only as important as the car you drive, or the clothes you wear, or even the size of your house. This leads to people attempting to impress their friends and colleagues by showing off their materialistic assets. As of now, the world is being ruled more by brands and products than it is by actual governments. We are locked behind the barcodes of the same items that we're purchasing. And unlike the tinted pieces of paper that the world works so hard for, time cannot be replenished. Out of this indefinite cycle of consumerism, there's only a finite amount of happiness that can be extracted. So what do people do then? Well, they try to convince themselves that it was worth it. They think that they can buy satisfaction and tranquility. The issue doesn't end there either. Consumerism also has a detrimental impact on the planet. The clothes and apparel from the fashion and textile industries are produced using substantial amounts of water, energy, chemicals, raw materials, all of which are rapidly depleting the Earth's natural resources. A realization is required that while an individual's money might belong to them, the resources of the Earth are common to all. Hence, in satisfying self, we are simultaneously robbing the less fortunate of their fair share of resources. Now, there's an economic concept termed scarcity. Can I get a show of hands of how many people are studying economics or have studied economics? Okay, so this concept scarcity, it means that while the resources available to man are restricted, man's desires, on the other hand, are infinite. As long as we exist, it is in our constitution to want, to yearn, to desire. We cannot get enough because we can never tell when enough is enough. And what's more, enough itself is something that's very relative. What's sufficient for one might be excessive for another, and a bare minimum for yet someone else. How do we solve this issue then? How do we, as a society, prevail over this complication? Is it even possible to satisfy infinite desire with only a finite amount of resources? Perhaps. Perhaps the answer lies beyond consumerism, beyond insatiable desire. Perhaps it lies beyond materialism and beyond our whims and longings. Let's take a moment to imagine. I'd like you to imagine a life with less of the unnecessary things, but more of the stuff that matters. Joy, meaning, peace. Sounds nice, doesn't it? What if I told you that there's a way that we can all start on our path towards this kind of life? How, you asked? You could achieve this through minimalism. Now, there's a lot of misbelief surrounding minimalism, so allow me to first tell you what minimalism is not. Minimalism is not the renouncement of all things material and living the life of a sage. However, minimalism can help you achieve that. Minimalism isn't selling your car and furniture and living in a one-room apartment with 2 pairs of clothes, although that could be you, but it would be your own choice and not a requisite that's thrust upon you by society. Hence, minimalism itself is infinite in nature, in the sense that it tailors to your life specifically. You could have a car and a house, a successful career and a family, or you could have a minimal amount of possessions and live out of a suitcase. The possibilities for you to be minimalist are endless. In fact, at its essence, minimalism is the intentional promotion of the things that we value most and the removal of everything that distracts us from it. It's a re-evaluation of life. Here's some food for thought. Predominantly, humans pursue contentment, peace, meaningful relationships, and such. Having said that, society often influences and sways us towards worldly things. And in this process, sometimes we tend to lose out on what's truly important. You know, the society has deluded us into thinking that we need these things to validate ourselves, to validate our hard work. However, the true validation can be found inside yourself. Now, my parents themselves, they try to live a simplistic, minimalistic life, and they've tried to inculcate that in me from a fairly young age. Whenever I would throw a tantrum, they would never flat out refuse any of my demands. Instead, their approach was to talk to me, ask me if I really needed that admittedly overpriced toy or game, if it was an absolute necessity that I could not live without. And in hindsight, it's a good thing that they asked these questions, because toddlers don't quite understand the value of money. And toddlers are nearly always impressed by the shiny new toy at the store, although they may have the exact same one at home. That's me in the picture from when I had a little phase when I was head over heels in love with superheroes. Ironically, that phase is still going on, but let's pretend that I've grown out of it. So during this time, I demanded every piece of superhero merchandise that I saw on the TV or in the supermarket. And my mother worked her way around this very cleverly by reusing household materials to fulfill these wishes. And in hindsight, the masks that my mother and I painted by hand, the costumes that we improvised from clothes that I already owned, these memories and these masks, they will forever mean a lot more to me than a store-bought costume ever will. Plus, I was an eco-friendly Spider-Man. Saying no to children doesn't necessarily mean breaking their heart. Taking my own example, I think you can see that kids can be easily pacified with inexpensive or improvised toys as well. Because at the end of the day, it is not something, but rather someone to play with that they want. And there's lots of alternatives, such as engaging your children in more meaningful activities, spending more time with them outdoors among Mother Nature, and the internet. The internet is flooded with do-it-yourself ideas that are much more than a way to just save money. They are opportunities for bonding, and they teach a valuable lesson about minimalism and reducing wastage. Also, lending and borrowing is another excellent practice. I remember various occasions when I needed a specific color of shirt, or an article of clothing, or a prop for a play, and instead of rushing to the supermarket to buy these things, we'd ask our friends and family. And this would sometimes put us back in touch with people whom we had grown apart from. And it also cut down on unnecessary purchases of things that would probably never be of use after a day or two. I mean, I don't think any of us can find a use for a styrofoam sheep in our house apart from a decorative thing. By aiding a person in identifying the important aspects of life, minimalism can really help you find time for better pursuits. Maybe learn an instrument that you've been putting off for years, or a language that you've always wanted to learn, or maybe even something as simple as reading a book that you've always wanted to read but never had the time for. And it also eases you from the stress of earning as you realize that the crucial parts of life cannot be bought. And as a direct result of this, it gives you peace of mind. It unlocks a limitless amount of potential and maybe even happiness within an individual. Hence, minimalism isn't simply about compromising on material things to find happiness, but rather about finding happiness through what you already have in your life. Minimalism also benefits the environment and nature because it extends from just personal belongings all the way to everything that we consume, be it food, water, electricity, energy. These are all natural resources that belong to the entire planet as a whole, and minimalism prevents the overexploitation of these resources. Coming towards the end, I just want to mention, if I haven't already, that there's nothing inherently wrong with owning stuff. The issue arises when we start assigning meaning to our possessions. All I wish to say is that minimalism is helping me live a life free from the shackles of consumerist culture, free from the obligation of possessing. It's assisting me to form stronger bonds with the people that I hold in high esteem, and it's helping me trim the fat from life. It is broadening the horizon for me, allowing me to pursue more with less. And you know what? I have conviction that it can do the same for you. Hence, I have only one request. Once all of you return today, I'd like you to look around your house and identify one thing that you don't need, one thing that you can live without. And once you're done identifying what that one thing is, put it aside in a box. Do this every day for a month. And at the end of the month, you'll be surprised by how many things there are that you can live without. Of course, the process won't be easy. Your friends might make fun of you. The media and society might critique and criticize you. However, this is the beyond we need. This is how we must move beyond our infinite desire. Because at the end of the day, the issue isn't that you shouldn't own anything, but rather nothing should own you. Thank you.